Welcome, Ollie members, and those of you joining us on YouTube. This is White House Memories, brought to you by Osher Lifelong Learning at George Mason University. Our speaker today is Alan DeValerio, and Alan is originally from Rhode Island. He came to the DC, Maryland, Virginia area out of an interest in writing political humor. He worked at the White House from 1980 to 1990 and is going to share his experiences with us. Alan, welcome to Ollie.
Thank you very much. Susan's relatively brief introduction reminds me of a story. When William Howard Taft was president, he was asked to speak at a college commencement. The administration that year decided to hold the festivities outdoors. But when the big day arrived, it was very hot and humid out. So all the speakers on the dais were asked to please keep their remarks short. The person that was introduced Taft was a noted orator of the time by the name of Chauncey Depew. And he either didn't get the message or he chose to ignore it. And he went on and on with a very long, drawn out introduction. And he kept on referring to the rather portly Taft as being pregnant. He said Taft was pregnant with ideas and pregnant with plans to move the country forward. Well, finally, Taft got up to speak. He said, Mr. Depew has indicated to you that I'm pregnant. He said, if it's true, I want you all to be the first to know. If it's a girl, I'll name it Mary after my mother. If it's a boy, I'll name it Robert after my father. But if it's what I think it is, which is nothing but a lot of hot air, I'll name it Chauncey Depew. So hopefully you won't consider my presentation to be a lot of hot air. I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. I'm going to talk about my own personal experiences. I was what they call a contract butler, which means I was not full-time. I was there for approximately 10 years. Then I'm going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the most elaborate of all White House functions, which is, of course, the state dinner. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the people that I worked with. For example, when I first started working there, the maitre d' was a fellow by the name of John Ficklin. John started his career at the White House as a pantry boy in 1939. So Roosevelt was president at that time. So you can imagine some of the stories that he had to tell, and I'm going to relate some of those to you. And then at the end, I will do a Q&A. So obviously, if you have any questions, please hold them to the end. Now, I have a feeling that if I started with the Q&A, the first question would probably be, how did you get this job? So that is where I will begin. I am originally from Rhode Island, but I was living in Southern Florida back in the mid-70s. And I came upon a book at the library one day called Upstairs at the White House. It was written by a fellow by the name of J.B. West. J.B. West was the head usher. Now, at any one time, there can be up to 100 or so full-time employees at the White House, from butlers to maids to chefs to plumbers to electricians, and they all fall under the administration of the usher's office. And I thought it was a fascinating account of his various dealings with the first families that he served. Now, at that time, I developed an interest in writing political humor. And I finally realized that living in Southern Florida was not going to get me anywhere. So I moved to the DC area. The first thing I thought about doing was getting a part-time job. I had worked as a banquet waiter when I was in college in the summertime. And so I got a job as an on-call waiter for the Senate restaurant on Capitol Hill. And it got me to start to think about the book. And I started thinking, I wonder if there's any chance that I might be able to get a job at the White House. So one day I saw my senator from Rhode Island and I approached him and I said, introduced myself. And I said, Senator, I'd like to get a job at the White House. Can you help me? So he referred me to someone in his office. That person in turn called the usher's office. They said, yes, we do hire, again, on a contract basis. And so they gave me the FBI forms. I had to go through the entire FBI investigation. And it took quite a long time before I was actually hired. And I remember the day that I got the call from the head butler. It was a Saturday morning. He asked me if I could come in on that following Monday to do a dinner. And of course, I was thrilled to finally get the opportunity to work there. And so I said, what time should I be there? And he told me. And then I said, well, what should I wear? And so he said, oh, just a tuxedo. Well, that was going to be a problem because I didn't have a tux. Well, so he said, look, get yourself a tux. And then if, when you're ready, give me a call and I'll put you on another function. Well, I didn't want this opportunity to go by. And so I said, no, that's okay. I'll get a tux. If I have to steal one, I will get a tux. And fortunately, I was able to get down to the local department store that afternoon. I got fitted for a tux. I managed to convince the salesman to have it ready for me, have it altered and ready for me on that Monday. And he did. And so I picked it up and I went to the White House. When I got there, I wasn't sure where to go. So I went to the North Gate and I gave the policeman my ID. He checked me off the list and then he gave me a red badge to wear. And then he sent me on my way. Now I'm standing on the grounds of the White House and I don't know where to go. So I walked through the front door. Well, that was a mistake. Fortunately, the usher's office is right next to the front door. And when I say the front door, I'm referring to the door, the angle from which you see the White House behind me, the north portico that faces Pennsylvania Avenue. And so he pulled me into the office and he said, next time we'll explain to you where to go. So there I was, my first official White House function. At this point, Jimmy Carter had already been defeated by Ronald Reagan. And so he was having a sort of a farewell dinner for his staff in the state dining room. Needless to say, I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what they were going to expect from me. One of the things that I eventually learned about White House entertaining is that the White House gets its budget from Congress. So they can spend however they want. So money is no object. Well, let me rephrase that. Your money is no object. But this was good for me because all I had to do that night was to walk around the state dining room with a bottle of wine and pour wine for anyone who needed a refill. So I could handle that. Now, this was in December, and December is, of course, the busiest month of the year because of all the Christmas parties. And one of them that I did that I wanted to tell you about that really stands out in my mind, it was on December 22nd. Now, you might be wondering, what's the big deal about a Christmas party on December 22nd? Well, the big deal was that it was held outdoors. Now, as you know, weather-wise, the DC area can be just about anything in December. It can be raining, it can be snowing, it can be bitter cold, it can be fairly warm. Fortunately, it was a very nice sunny day. Now, apparently the Carters were big figure skating fans. And so they actually erected a skating rink on the White House South Lawn. And they invited former gold medalist Peggy Fleming to come and perform. And she brought an entourage with her. And it was a two-part program, an afternoon and an evening show. Now, in the afternoon, I was on the grill. And they gave us this big army peacoats to wear over our tuxedo pants. So with the heavy jacket, the heat from the grill, the heat from the sun, I was pretty comfortable. But at night, it was a completely different story. The sun went down, the temperatures dropped, and believe me, it was cold. It was so cold that I saw a congressman with his hands in his own pockets. Now, that's cold. Now, at night, I wasn't on the grill. My job was to pour hot chocolate. And they gave us these very large mittens to wear over our hands to keep them warm. But I couldn't manipulate the glass mugs that they gave us and wear the mittens at the same time. So my hands were freezing. And I had to figure out some way to keep them warm. Well, when nobody was looking, I would pour some of the hot chocolate on my hands to keep them warm. Well, when the show was over, I look up and who's coming right to my station but President Carter and Mrs. Carter. So needless to say, I'm like really excited, thinking, this is I just started working here. This is my chance to serve the president and the first lady at the same time. And so they came up to my station and Mrs. Carter asked for some hot chocolate. So I got out the mug and I put it under the spigot and I pulled the handle down and guess what? It was completely empty. I can't imagine where that hot chocolate could have gone. Anyway, needless to say, I was a bit disappointed, but I had no idea that I had many, many more opportunities to serve the president and first lady in my future. Now, on January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan took the office of the presidency. And on January 21st, the Reagans held their first official White House function. It was a huge reception on the state floor for about 700 or 800 people. Everything that night was passed, all the hors d'oeuvres and all the drinks. And I was one of the first butlers out of the pantry into the Red Room to greet the first guests. The first three people that I saw were Vin Scully, who was the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers at that time, Lou Rawls, and Ray Charles. These were the first three people. So you can imagine the guest list. Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon were there, and Bob Hope and Frank Sinatra and Jimmy Stewart, and I can go on and on. Now, I mentioned earlier about the usher's office. If you went through the usher's office north door to the other side, there was another door, and that would take you out into a little foyer, and that's where the president's elevator is located. So the president and first lady would come down the elevator, they'd get off in that little foyer, they'd make a left, and then they'd go through a door and they'd step out onto the state floor. To the right would be the state dining room, then the red room, blue room, green room, and the east room. And so that's what they did. They walked down the corridor, and all the guests filled in behind them and followed them into the east room, except for two people, and it was Tony Bennett and his wife. For some reason or other, they decided to stay back. And then when President and Mrs. Reagan walked into the East Room, they started walking down the corridor, and they didn't realize that I was standing right behind them. And as they walked down the corridor, Tony put his arm around his wife's shoulder, and then she put her arm around his backside, and she reached down and pinched his bottom. Certainly a pivotal moment in the history of White House entertainment. Now, I mentioned earlier about giving you a behind the scenes look at state dinners. Now, I was lucky in that I was able to work myself into a position where when they needed an extra person, I would be one of the first to be called. So when we had a state dinner, most of the other butlers, part-time butlers, would come in around 6 p.m. and they'd work till about midnight. But I would go in at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I was there from the very beginning to the very end. Now, the first thing that we would do would be to set up a tea service in the Blue Room. And then they would have the welcoming ceremony on the South Lawn. Eventually, the president and visiting head of state would adjourn to the Oval Office, and then some of the dignitaries would come up to the Blue Room, the Green Room, the Blue Room, I'm sorry, and have tea and coffee and pastries. And then we would break that down and go back to the kitchen. And then we would clean up, put everything away, and have lunch. And then we would start setup. Setup would be now about 12. This will be about 12:30. Now, dinner doesn't start till 7:30. So this kind of gives you an idea of how much work goes into the setup for a state dinner. Now, at this point, I want to give you just a very brief history lesson on state dinners. I'm going to go back to the Eisenhower administration. If you were a guest at an Eisenhower state dinner, you would be one of about 85 people. You would be served 6 courses. You would sit at what they called an E-shaped table. So it was one long table and then a table here, 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 just like the letter E. There would be no alcohol served, or I should say no mixed drinks served. If there was any alcohol, it would be in the form of a rum punch. And of course, there would be wine with dinner. And this is pretty much what state dinners looked like at that in that era. But when the Kennedys came in, Jackie Kennedy changed the entire look of state dinners. She got rid of the E-shaped table and she brought in round tables that would seat 8 people. She increased the guest list to about maybe 100 to 110. She hired a French chef to serve more European style foods. She reduced it from 6 to 4 courses. So the first thing that would happen would be the housemen would come in with the tables and they would set them up. And then we would put the cloths on the tables. And then the maids would come down from upstairs and they would iron all the cloths. And then we would begin the setup. The first thing that would go on the table is what they call a base plate or a show plate. It has no particular function. But at this point, it helped to guide us as to where to put the goldware. There would be 3 courses set at the table. The first course was usually a fish course. The second course or the main course was usually meat. And the third course was salad. And of course, this is European style eating. Americans tend to eat their salad first. Europeans eat their salad prior to dessert. So we would start setting up from the inside out. We would set up the salad fork and knife, then the main course fork and knife, and the fish course fork and knife. And as a guest, of course, you would eat from the outside in. There would be 4 glasses at each place, a white wine, a red wine, a water glass, and a champagne flute. Of course, there would be beautiful flower arrangements on every table. The White House has its own full-time florist and its own flower shop. There would be, of course, a menu on the table, and there would be a place card with your name on it, and a white napkin, very simply folded with the eagle embossed on it. And then there would be little tins of mixed nuts and little tins of Godiva chocolates. And one of my favorite jobs was to sit in the back room and fill the tins with Godiva chocolates. And I put them in the tins and I put them in my pockets. And believe me, I never went without Godiva chocolates. So the entire time that I was there. Now, scattered around the state dining room would be service tables. And on the service tables would be the dessert plate. It would have a doily on it. And then on top of the dessert plate would be a finger bowl with some water and a sprig of mint. And then you would have your dessert fork and spoon on the sides. Now, one of the other butlers was telling me that one time he put the water bowl, finger bowl in front of a lady, and she didn't know what to do with it. So she picked up the bowl and started to drink the water. I don't know how true that story is, but he insists that it happened. And that kind of brings me to protocol. Every table has a host or a hostess. Generally speaking, there are people from the administration, people that have been to many state dinners. So as a guest, all you had to do was follow what the host or hostess did, and you would be safe. A couple of other protocols: wives and husbands did not sit with each other. Now, food in those days was served what they call butler style. So you had one big long tray, and all the food would be on the tray, and there would be 2 butlers per table. So let's say I was the lead butler and we were serving the main course. I would approach the host or hostess and I would place the tray to their left. Then I would hand them the serving pieces. And then they would take whatever amount of food they wanted and they would put the serving pieces back on the tray. And then I would go counterclockwise around the table. And then the second butler would come with the vegetables. So that is how everything was served back in those days. Today, it's different. Today, everything is pre-plated. Now, one time we made a couple of exceptions because the entertainment that evening was the blind pianist, George Shearing. And he was allowed to sit with his wife because of his handicap. Now, I remember serving him the first course, and I guess his wife was really impressed by it because she took a look at it, and then she turned to him and she said, "Oh, George, look at that." Now, another time I had Frank Sinatra at my table, and prior to dinner, he was regaling the guests with a story about how he had punched out a reporter and put him in the hospital. And then he called the hospital a couple of days later to find out how the poor fellow was getting along, not out of an interest in his well-being, but because he wanted to punch him out and put him back in the hospital again. Now, in Frank's defense, I have to tell you that he made a request that evening that, to my knowledge, had never been done before, maybe since, and that is that he requested that if the butlers were finished with their work in time, that we be allowed to come down to the East Room and listen to the entertainment. So needless to say, we rushed to get done. And so there I was sitting in the East Room of the White House, listening to 2 of the great entertainers of their era, Frank Sinatra and Perry Como, and getting paid for it. So that was a special treat. Another time I had famed violinist Yitzhak Perlman at my table, and he was a very nice guy. He was very, very outgoing, very friendly. And for some reason that night, we served two white wines instead of a white wine and a red wine. And he asked me if I knew the difference between them. And I should have, but unfortunately I didn't. So I had to be honest with him. I said, I have no idea. And he just kind of smiled. And a short time later, I was standing by the table, and one of the ladies at the table asked him what he was going to be playing that evening. And he looked over at me and he said, to paraphrase my friend here, he said, I have no idea. Another time, he was performing in the East Room, and they had a little reception afterwards. And when they after the performance, they came back to the state dining room, and I noticed that one of the military aides was carrying his violin around just like this, and she was following him wherever he went. And finally, I got a chance to go up and speak to her. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, well, this is Mr. Perlman's violin. It's probably a Stradivarius. She said, who knows, how much it's worth. And she said, it never leaves his sight. And she seemed to be kind of proud that she was asked to do this. And so I said to her, well, it's a good thing he doesn't play the cello. And I hope you're out there laughing, because she didn't think it was too funny. Now, guests would come up from the south portico, and they come up to the state floors, and we would pass hors d'oeuvres and drinks. And then eventually the president and first lady and visiting head of state and spouse would come down the grand staircase, and the Marine band would be in the foyer playing Hail to the Chief, which I always thought was exciting. Then they would greet the guests in the East Room, and then they would go into the dining room for dinner. Now, after dinner was served, some of the members of the Marine band would come in and play some music. Then the president and visiting head of state would get up and toast. Then the guests would leave the state dining room, and then we would serve coffee and liqueurs to the guests in the staterooms. Then they would adjourn to the East Room for the entertainment. When they came out, we would pass champagne, and then there would be dancing in the foyer to the Marine band. And then when the president and first lady left the premises, that was your cue as a guest to leave also. Fortunately, the Reagans were not late people, and so pretty much by every state dinner by 11:30 they were gone, and I was out by midnight. So, but it was still it was a long day, 9 a.m. to midnight. Now, one of the full-time butlers was telling me that he was there when Lyndon Johnson was president, and he said one time he was on a schedule where he had to serve the president his breakfast at 7 a.m. and he was not. Couldn't leave until the president went to bed that night. Well, it was a state dinner, and Johnson liked to dance, and he liked to stay up late, and he didn't go to bed till 2 a.m. the next day. Unfortunately, he was on a schedule where he had to return at 7 a.m. To serve the president breakfast again. And he said that he was so tired that he got in his car, and as he drove off, he fell asleep at the wheel, and he drove off the road. Fortunately, he was not seriously injured. But at that point, he said, if Johnson is reelected, he said, I'm quitting this job. But fortunately, Johnson decided not to run, so he stuck it out. Now, of course, there are many other different types of functions that go on at the White House all the time. You can't have a state dinner for every visiting head of state that comes through D.C. So President Reagan would have what they called working luncheons. There would be about 15 to 20 people in the state dining room. And some of them that kind of stand out in my mind. One time we had Pierre Trudeau from Canada. Now, Ronald Reagan was in private the same as he was in public, very outgoing, very affable, always smiling. Neither he nor Trudeau smiled once during that entire lunch, so you knew that they were not seeing eye to eye. Another time we had the president of Senegal, and he was about 7 feet tall. Now, Ronald Reagan was no slouch at about 6'4", but this guy made Reagan look short. And speaking of short, we had the president of Israel one time, Yitzhak Shamir, and he was short. He was maybe about 5'3", 5'4". Now, when they sit at the table, they sit facing each other. And in this instance, there was a flower arrangement on the table, and Shamir couldn't see over it, so he attempted to move it out of the way. And when he did, he knocked it over, and water went all over the table. And needless to say, flower arrangements from that point on were much shorter. Um, Probably the most memorable visit was from Andrei Gromyko, who at that time was the Russian ambassador to the United States. And this was probably around 1984, during kind of the height of the Cold War. And it was the one and only time that Nancy Reagan actually made an appearance at one of these events. Uh, there would be a little, some hors d'oeuvres and some drinks passed at the beginning, and she came down and she wanted to impress upon Gromyko the importance of the two countries getting together and to live in peace. And I thought that was really classy of her to do that. Another time they were having the NHL National Hockey League All-Star game in Washington, and so President Reagan had a lunch to host the Hockey League All-Stars. Now, I'm not a hockey fan, but I'm a sports fan, and I kind of wanted to do this function. But I was assigned another function. The social secretary was having a luncheon in the library downstairs for former social secretaries. But she was upstairs dealing with the Hockey League luncheon, and she was running really late. And so while we were waiting, we had no idea when she was going to show up. And I had to go to the bathroom. So I thought, well, if I have to go to the locker room, I'm going to have to walk all the way down the corridor, go up the stairs, go through the usher's office, through the pantry, back downstairs to the locker room. I said, I can't do that. It's going to take way too long. But there's a guest bathroom on that floor, and there was nobody around. So I thought, well, I'll take a chance. So I walk into the guest bathroom, and I'm not in there for more than 10 seconds. And all of a sudden the door swings open, and it's Bob Hope. Now, you recall that I mentioned earlier that I came to DC out of an interest in writing political humor. And I used to keep a copy of some of my topical one-liners that I was working on in my pocket at all times. But it never occurred to me, unfortunately, during that short meeting, that I should have given Bob Hope some of my jokes, and who knows what might have happened. But anyway, I was watching a PBS special recently on the career of Bob Hope, and he had a phenomenal career, and it's really heartwarming to realize what he did, for so many years for all our troops. And so I'd like to think back and think about that brief moment, and say, Bob, wherever you are, thanks for that memory. Another time we had a dinner in the Red Room, and it was a Notre Dame theme. So the current coach of the team was there. Father Hesburgh, who was president of Notre Dame at the time, was there. And also Frank Gifford, former NFL great. Now, the plan was to have hors d'oeuvres and cocktails in the Blue Room, dinner in the Red Room, and then they were going to go downstairs to the theater and watch a movie. So Frank came up to the bar and he ordered a vodka on the rocks. And there was another guest standing at the bar, and he turned to the fellow and said, what's the movie we're going to see tonight? And he said, it's Knute Rockne, All-American. So Frank turned back to the bartender and said, you better make that a double. I think the most memorable reception that I worked was they were having an exhibit at the Smithsonian called Champions of American Sport. And so President Reagan hosted a reception for all the people involved. And this was probably one of the most incredible arrays of sports talent in one room anywhere. Muhammad Ali was there, and Red Auerbach, and Bill Russell, and Oscar Robertson, and Johnny Unitas, and Yogi Berra, and it was just absolutely amazing. So for me, as a sports fan, there's no question that was the most memorable reception that I ever witnessed. Now, one of the things that privileges that I had was having the opportunity to work upstairs sometimes in the family quarters. I'm sure that many of you out there have taken the White House tour. Unfortunately, you don't get to see the best part, which is, of course, the upstairs. I mean, it's like living in a museum. It is just absolutely spectacular. Everything is so beautifully appointed. And you think about the history of the house. You have the the president's bedroom and the Queen's room and the Lincoln room, and every president except for George Washington lived there. So you have, that aura. And I really liked working upstairs because functions were smaller, less formal, no Secret Service around. And one of them that really stands out in my mind was we were hosting Helmut Kohl. He was the Chancellor of Germany at the time, and his wife. And so we were upstairs setting up dinners up there held in the family dining room, which holds four of those round tables, so about 32 people. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were setting up the dinner. And all of a sudden, President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan came walking in, dressed casually, and President came over to his table, and he said, I just want to see who I'm going to be sitting with tonight. And I was standing there, and he had just recently signed a photo of me serving both he and Mrs. Reagan. And they both signed it, and it's a really nice, beautiful keepsake for me. And so I wanted to thank him, and so I did. I said, Mr. President, you signed this photo for me, and I just wanted to say thanks. Of course, he had no idea what I was talking about, but being, like I said, the affable person that he was, he smiled and he said, "Oh, you're more than welcome." He said, "Anytime I can do that, I'd be glad to." And that's the way he was. He was just a very likable person. Um, One of the special things that made that evening special that night was that I was asked to serve the president's table. Now, normally the president had a full-time butler who would serve him at just about every single function. And I guess for some reason or other, he wasn't there that evening. So the maitre d' asked me to serve the president's table. So that was an honor for me. The other special part of that evening was the entertainment. It was the late, great Marvin Hamlisch, who to me was one of the great composers, American composers of all time. So imagine we were all receptions on that floor are held in what they call the Yellow Oval Room. It's a beautifully appointed room off the Truman balcony. So imagine we were standing just outside of the Yellow Oval Room, and on the inside was the President of the United States and the Chancellor of Germany and his wife, and Marvin Hamlisch sitting at the black Steinway piano playing The Way We Were. It was a very special moment. Now, the night almost ended in disaster. I was one of the first butlers in after the entertainment to serve champagne. I had 4 champagne glasses on a tray. Now, not the flutes, but the fruit cup type glasses. And I was to serve President and Mrs. Reagan and Chancellor Kohl and his wife. Normally, when we serve drinks, we serve standing up. So holding a tray upright when you're standing, of course, is no problem. But they were seated on the sofa. And so I had to kind of bend down to serve them. And I wasn't used to that. And as I bent down, the glasses started to slide slowly off the tray. And thank goodness I was able to upright it before any damage had been done. But imagine how mortifying that would have been if I had spilled champagne on those people. Even today, when I see those fruit cups and they don't have any fruit in them, I break out into a sweat. I mentioned earlier about talking about some of the people that I worked with, and I mentioned John Ficklin. Again, he started his career in 1939 when Roosevelt was president, and many, many members of the Ficklin family had served at the White House. About 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote an article for the White House Historical Association about the legacy of the Ficklin family. John retired in 1983. And when he did, I thought, gee, this guy is like, he's got to write a book. And so I wanted to be the one to help him. So I spoke to his brother, Sam, who was still working part-time at the White House. And Sam spoke to John. John said, yes, he would be interested. And so he invited me over to his house. I went over and I met his wife and his son. And we sat down and talked, and I'm going to pass on a few of the stories that he told to me. he really liked the Trumans. He said they were very down to earth, very likable people. They took an active interest in all their staff. They knew everybody by name. He said that one time his brother Charles was also a butler there, who started in 1935, just 4 years before John did. And he was not feeling well. And so one day, Mrs. Truman came up to John and said, "I haven't seen Charles in a while. Where has he been?" And John said, "Well, he's not feeling too well." And so she sent her own private physician to go and look in on him. And it was determined that he had pneumonia. So they put him in the hospital. And a few days later, President Truman was driven to the hospital to visit. So there they were, just Charles Ficklin and Harry Truman sitting in the hospital room, just the two of them. And he said that's the kind of people that they were. He said Eisenhower was one of the only presidents that took any active interest in food. He said he helped create the daily menus. He picked out all the wines for state dinners. And then he said occasionally he had a barbecue on the roof of the White House, and he'd go up to the roof and he would barbecue steaks on the roof of the White House. Now, of course, we all remember where we were on November 22nd, 1963. John was at the White House that day. He recalled when Mrs. Kennedy returned from Dallas. He greeted her at the elevator. She still had on that pink outfit with the blood stains all over it. She asked him for some hot tea, and then she went up to her room. The next day, she requested that John be a usher at the church service, and John's brother Charles, who was maitre d' at the time, was asked to accompany the family to Arlington Cemetery. When we first sat down, John said he didn't want to say anything disparaging about anybody, but when it came to talking about Lyndon Johnson, he kind of changed his tune a little bit. He said Johnson was a very difficult man to work for. He said he was very stubborn. He had a mind of his own, and you couldn't change it. When one of his daughters was married at the White House, it came time to cut the cake. Cake was like a really huge cake, and some of it was not all cake. Some of it was cardboard that had been put in there to keep the cake upright. And Johnson decided he was going to butt in and try and help the couple, married couple, cut the cake, and which he wasn't supposed to do, but John Ficklin said he wasn't going to tell him any differently. And so when he cut into it, he cut into the cardboard, and it made a big mess. He said that Johnson's favorite drink was scotch and soda. If you were a bartender and he approached you for a drink, even if you had just opened a bottle of soda water 10 seconds prior to that, you had to open a brand new bottle of soda water for him every time. And he said that during the height of the Vietnam War, he was still drinking scotch, but he was chasing it with milk, I guess because of his queasy stomach. At this point, John was still getting Christmas cards from the Fords, the Nixons, and the Carters. And just as I was about to leave, he decided he wanted to show me his memorabilia collection, which was, of course, absolutely astounding. He had about 4 or 5 photo albums that were all about that thick, with hundreds and hundreds of photos of him with the various first families that he worked for. And he had notes, all kinds of notes from presidents, and many from Jackie Kennedy, who was a big note writer. And so he had just absolutely an astounding collection of memorabilia. Unfortunately, the book never got off the ground. John died about 3 months later. Now, John's successor was a fellow by the name of Eugene Allen. Some of you might recognize that name if you saw the movie The Butler. It was based on the life story of Gene Allen. Gene was one of the nicest people that I have ever met. He was just a outstanding person. In all the years that I worked for him, I never once saw him get angry or upset with anything. He was just a great guy. I used to try to convince them to to tell me some of the stories of the past, and it was kind of hard to to get them to do that. But occasionally he would feel like he wanted to talk, and he was telling me one time that John Kennedy, when he first came into office, didn't seem to take any interest in getting to know the full-time butlers. And then one day he had lunch in the second floor with former President Eisenhower. And of course, Eisenhower had been at the White House for 8 years. He knew everybody by their first names and was on a very friendly basis with them. And he said, ever since that luncheon, he said Kennedy started to take an interest in getting to know the butlers. Now, we all know that Kennedy was noted for his philandering, but he said that, believe it or not, he said Lyndon Johnson was actually worse than Kennedy. Johnson had a military aide who would bring women up the back stairs when Mrs. Johnson was out of town, and then he would, when Johnson was finished with them, he would escort them out. Now I want to backtrack a little bit. Something I forgot to mention. I find very fascinating. John Ficklen's son eventually became a special assistant to the president for national security. And the fascinating part of the story is that John Ficklen's father was a slave. So here you had a man who was born into slavery, who had not one but two sons, maitre d's at the White House, and a grandson who was special assistant to the president. And again, I find that to be absolutely fascinating. And the best way that I can think of to sum it up is to quote that famous 20th century philosopher, Yogi Berra, who was informed one day that a Jewish man had just been elected mayor of Dublin, Ireland. And Yogi smiled and said, "Only in America." I was visiting the Renwick Gallery, which is right across the street from the White House, one day, and I went into the gift shop, and they were selling a DVD called "Workers at the White House," and I saw that some of them were people on the cover. There were people that I worked with, so I thought this might be interesting, and so I purchased it. And when I was watching it, they interviewed Henry Haller. He was the head chef when I was there. He started when Nixon was president. Henry just recently passed away about 3 or 4 months ago, and he was in his late 90s. And when they were interviewing him, he said something that made me laugh. He said that sometimes he has dreams that he's back working at the White House. And he said it was such a fantastic experience that when he would wake up, he would be so disappointed that to realize that, oh, it was just a dream. And that had me laughing because that happens to me even to this day. I still have dreams that I'm back working at the White House. And now probably 99% of all the people that I worked with back in those days, they're all deceased. And so to be back in that atmosphere with all the friendships that I made, yeah, it's very disappointing when you wake up, because that's what it was. It was a dream job. Try to imagine going to your place of business on any given day and not knowing who in the world might be there. And that's literally how it was. I never knew when I walked through those doors, who I might see. I had an opportunity one time to talk about my favorite all-time sitcom, All in the Family, with one of its stars, Sally Struthers, who played the part of Gloria, and who was just a lovely, lovely person. Had a chance to hear Carol Burnett do her Tarzan yell from the East Room all the way into the state dining room. I had a chance to talk about comedy writing with the great Carl Reiner. I had a chance to talk about the Yankees with the aforementioned Yogi Berra. I had a chance to listen to Benny Goodman play the clarinet and to hear Eubie Blake play the piano in the East Room. Because again, that's what it was. It was a dream job. And in conclusion, I want to say, and I think that anyone who's ever worked at the White House would agree with me, you will eventually leave the White House, but it never leaves you. And I thank you all for participating today, and I am open to questions.
Okay, well, we'll start with the ones that are in the Q&A. And Stephanie asked, what types of foods were served for hors d'oeuvres in the White House?
Repeat that.
What type of foods were served as hors d'oeuvres?
As hors d'oeuvres. Let me think for a second. Well, one of my favorites was scallops wrapped in bacon. Everybody used to love those. Depending on the time of year, shrimp, shrimp cocktail. Surprisingly, shrimp cocktail was always reserved for the reporters during Christmas, but I loved it because we would peel the shrimp in the pantry, and there was hundreds and hundreds of shrimps, and we of course would eat our fill. And there was all kinds of wonderful desserts, cookies, and those like that. Roland Mesnier was the White House pastry chef, and he did a fabulous job. Those are the ones that kind of come out in my mind. I'd have to think about it a little bit more to try to remember some of the others.
Arthur Lerner says Jimmy Carter was the ultimate straight shooter. What about him would surprise us?
I would say that he if you recall, that he banned alcohol from the White House for for receptions and state dinners and any kind of entertaining. And but he was a pretty good. I get this from the full-time butlers that he liked. He and Mrs. Carter liked Rob Roy's, which I think is Scotch and ginger ale, and so he was a pretty good drinker himself, even though he banned it from the White House.
Okay. What dietary accommodations were made for guests for religious or allergy reasons?
The only thing that I can recall was I mentioned earlier about Yitzhak Shamir, that working luncheon, and they brought in a kosher chef to serve his meal. Now, for a state dinner, it depended on the visiting head of state if there were any dietary restrictions. I don't really recall too many. Like I said, generally speaking, state dinners were fish, meat, salad, and that menu, we pretty much stuck to that from almost all state dinners. So the only one I can remember is Yitzhak Shamir, and they had a kosher chef come in to prepare his meal.
Oh, John asks, I recall there were questions at the time as to whether Ronald Reagan colored his hair. Any comments on this?
Well, I do recall, there were times when I was as close to him as you could possibly be, and I always tried to look and see how do you really know? I have to, Galen can take him at his word that he said he didn't. I think you'd have to speak to his barber on that one, but. So I as close as I could get to him, just really was no way to know for sure.
Okay, John Mayer, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Yeah, you've had a fascinating life, including the White House, and a very interesting conversation with us. If my math is correct, you served George H.W. Bush for a couple of years and Barbara Bush.
Yes.
Do you have any particular thoughts, plus or minus, about some of the senior staff you interfaced with? Thank you.
Well, mentioning the Bushes now, I saw them more as when he was vice president, and they were really nice people. Barbara Bush was, you saw her in public. She was the same in private. She was very, very likable. They were very family-oriented people, unlike the Reagans. Reagans were not particularly. The Reagans were Ronnie and Nancy, and then everybody else. whereas the Bushes, they had many, small grandchildren, and they were very, very family oriented. In regards to staff people, I got to know Jim Rosebush, who was Nancy Reagan's chief of staff, a very nice guy, and we got friendly. Um, I got to know Mike Deaver. You probably recall him. He was one of the three, big names on the Reagan staff: Ed Meese, Jim Baker, and Mike Deaver. And Mike was going to help me try to further my political humor career. Unfortunately, it never panned out. So that's really pretty much about it as far as, there were other people. Nancy Reagan's social secretary was Muffy Brandon. She was the first one. She was very straight-laced. She could clear a room in a matter of seconds. Basically, all she had to say was, "The president requests that you leave now," and she wasn't afraid to do it. But yeah, that's pretty much. We didn't really intermingle a whole lot with the staff.
Bruce asked, do you have any recollections working at the White House immediately after the attempted assassination of Reagan?
No, not really, because that pretty much put me out of business for a while, because I only worked there when the president had a function. So I was not there at any other occasions. So yeah, I mean, it from a personal standpoint, it cost me some work. But yeah, I didn't really have much interaction at that time. And I had just started working there too.
Joanne asks, it says, I'm surprised there was a focus on European cuisine. Was there ever a full switch to predominantly American cuisine, to your knowledge?
Not while I was there. I think when the younger Bush came into office, from what I understand from the, because I still knew some people that were working there, that he was tended more towards American style foods. But Nancy Reagan was very stylish. I always say that if there was any one administration I'd like to be able to work for, it would have been the Kennedys. But of course, I was, like too young for that. But second would be the Reagans, because they were very stylish. And Henry Haller was Swedish, so he had a European bent, and so they tended to stick with that, that kind of a menu.
Okay, Misty, can you please ask your question?
Yes, I was wondering if you really were referring to Mayor Briscoe, who was the Lord Mayor of Dublin, who was on a committee of businessmen when he was Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I don't know where I heard that story from, but if he was Jewish, maybe that's the person that was being referred to, but I really don't know.
Well, yes, he was Jewish, and he has a whole video.
Okay, so that was probably him then.
Yeah, Shalom Ireland, which you're going to probably only get from a friend in Hadassah. It's very difficult to get. That's how I got my couple of copies.
Yeah, and the former president, I think, of Ireland, was Eamon de Valera, which is very close to my last name, but I think he was Hispanic origin.
Yes, I think Spanish background.
Yeah.
Okay, Penny asked, did you spend any time with the children or grandchildren in the White House?
No, I didn't. That was the full timers interacted with them more. We didn't see. I saw Amy Carter a couple of times, and she pretty much kept to herself. And yeah, no, I didn't really have any. I had a little bit more interaction with the Reagan's older children. Maureen was there frequently. She was very much like her father, very outgoing, very likable. But the young children, no, I didn't have any interaction with them.
And Cosmo asked, did you recognize that President Reagan had dementia in his last year of office?
I'm going to tell you a story that one of the full-time butlers told me, and I'll let you make up your own mind. His name was Eli Young. He went on vacation one time, and when he came back the first day, he served the president breakfast. And the president said, "Oh, Eli," he said, "you know, I haven't seen you for a while. Where have you been?" And Eli said, "Oh, Mr. President, I was on vacation." So President Reagan said, "Well, welcome back." And then that afternoon, he served the president lunch. And the president said, "Oh, Eli, I haven't seen you for a while. Where have you been?" "Vacation, Mr. President." And he said, "Oh, welcome back." So when he told me that story, and this was like maybe around 84, 85, we both kind of laughed and thought it was funny. But thinking back on it now, I'm not really sure if that had any meaning behind it. It could have been just the president has lots of things on his mind. He could have just forgotten the conversation. But so I put that out there, and I let you all make up your own mind as to what if that had any indication or not.
Okay. How many days a week were you working as this was on call?
How many days a week? Well, it depended. Like I said, I was there whenever there was a function going on. So if the president was out of town, then I knew that I wasn't going to be working at all. Whenever the president was, so it could be 5 days, it could be 3. It was no real set schedule. It was just whenever there was a function, I was there.
Where was I? Was Nancy Reagan easy to work with?
Nancy Reagan was kind of an enigma. I guess maybe we all are to some degree. I'll tell you a few stories. One of the White House ushers was a fellow by the name of Nelson Pierce. He was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. And it was his daily job to deliver her mail. And one day she was in the solarium, which is up on the 3rd floor. And he came in to deliver the mail, and she had a little dog on her lap, and the dog jumped off her lap and ran over and bit Nelson on the leg. And she was upset with Nelson because she felt like he spooked the dog. And so she was more concerned about the dog than she was about Nelson getting bit. On the other hand, one of her maids, her name was, what was her name? I forget her name, but Anita Castillo, her husband ran Blair House at that time. And his name was Manuel, and he would come and work with us on occasion, and I got to know him pretty well. And there was some question about Anita's immigration papers, I guess, and so the Secret Service wanted Mrs. Reagan to let her go, even though there was no any formal charges. And Mrs. Reagan stood up to them and said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I want her. I want her on my staff." And then eventually she was cleared. And then she did 2 things that was close to my heart. Is when John Ficklin retired, she invited he and his wife to come to a state dinner, and she did that also for Gene Allen and his wife. And I thought that was fantastic, because when John Ficklin was asked to attend a state dinner, it was the first time any domestic servant had been asked to do that. And so I think to me that was like really, really classy that she would do that.
How did the menus change with the administration?
Well, like I said, when I started, Carter was already on his way out. So I really didn't see that much in terms of, the menus for Carter. And then by the time the Bushes came in, I was not working there nearly as much as I had during the Reagan years. Gene Allen retired in '86. And so I was not, I was like very close to him. And then when he retired, I wouldn't say I fell out of disfavor, but I just didn't work as much after that time. So I didn't really work that much during the Bush administration. But from what I recall, the menus pretty much stayed the same. They may have changed as time went on, but when I was there, and it was only a brief time during the Bush administration, I didn't really see any major changes.
We have a question. What did you do when not working at the White House?
Well, I was in the catering business, so I worked for as a supervisor for other caterers, and I eventually left because I got a full-time job with Marriott as a catering supervisor, and I just couldn't do both. The full-time job took up most of my time, and so I had to basically let it go. And they stopped serving the Godiva chocolates, so I thought, it's time to move on.
And Marianne says, did you pursue your political humor career? Judging by today's presentation, it would have been great.
Thank you. I did pursue it. Unfortunately, it never got off the ground. If we had more time, I could tell you about a half dozen stories where I had come like that close to breaking in, and it just never happened. Unfortunately, yeah, I have a bunch of stories, but we don't have the time for them. Maybe some other time.
And Marianne says, it sounds like a dream job. What made you leave?
Well, like I just explained, I got a full-time job. And I want to go back to that other question about political humor. You have to be careful with political jokes because sometimes they get elected.
See. I don't know if you would know the answer to this or not. Penny asked, I heard Lucy Johnson did a party for the staff helping out at her wedding. Did that happen?
I have no idea.
I think that pretty much takes care of our questions.
Okay.
So unless you have another story you'd like to impart.
Oh, I got like another 45 minutes of stories, but I'm gonna have to wait to another time.
Okay, well then, thank you very much. Wait, see if anything else comes in because they still come in fast. Did many former presidents come to dinners?
No, not that I can recall. The only time I can recall former presidents being there was when Sadat was assassinated. And I believe it was Carter and Nixon, and I'm trying to remember who else. I think it was just Carter and Nixon. They were sent to Egypt as emissaries for the United States. So those are the only two former presidents that I recall being there at any particular time.
And this is an interesting question. I don't know, once again, if you'll know the answer. Did presidents or their families ever order carryout?
Well, there's probably a good chance that they might do that. Any food that came into the White House unsolicited was thrown out. There was never any reason to take a chance with anything. So if somebody wanted to say, oh, I'm going to bake the president a batch of cookies, and send them to him, that's great. But, they weren't going to get them. And so if they did send out, it would be through the Secret Service, and someone from the Secret Service would have to go out and pick it up. They use certain restaurants in certain markets, to get the food. But it would definitely, they wouldn't call anyone and have anything, delivered. The Secret Service would handle it.
Jeffrey asked, was extra food given to charities?
I hope so. I have no idea whether it was or not, but I think I wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, I hope it was.
And did the Reagans ever eat their dinners from TV trays?
Well, you'd have to ask a a full-time butler that question, and unfortunately, none of them are any longer with us. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. And Arthur says, I know this predates your tenure, but surely you must have heard some good Nixon stories.
I will tell you one Nixon story. There was a fellow that worked there as a houseman. His name was Freddie Mayfield. Again, a great guy, really, really a nice person. And I asked him one time, I believe he started working when Kennedy was president. And I said, Fred, who was your favorite president? And he said Nixon. And it really took me by surprise. And I said, really, Nixon? And he said, yeah. He said, we had one thing in common. We both liked to fish. And he said, on a couple of occasions, Nixon, he said, took me to Key Biscayne with him to go fishing. And so I thought, well, it's nice to hear another side of the coin when it comes to Richard Nixon, because all you ever hear all the time is all the negatives, and it was nice to know that he did something like that for Fred. Fred, who died during the Reagan administration, while he was still working there, and he had a heart attack because he was so dedicated to the White House that he refused to go see a doctor, even though he knew he was not feeling well, and he died while he was working there, and he was a great person.
And these two are kind of mirror questions. One asks, how were the president's dinners treated to make sure nothing was wrong or dangerous about them? And the corollary was, how did leaders take steps to make sure their food was safe when participating in other leaders' formal dinners?
Well, the president's, I don't think there was any issues in terms of the food that was prepared at the White House. Now, when the president travels, now I know that I've worked at some hotels when the president was there, and they have their own. He has his own special. Usually, they're Navy mess people that come in and cook his food. So if the president is out like I say, at a hotel, he's not going to eat the hotel food. It would be specially prepared for him. But anything prepared in the White House, and I'm sure that any visiting head of state would feel comfortable that the White House is going to prepare, and nothing is going to happen. I don't ever recall anybody having to, from like a foreign country coming in to the kitchen to look at what's happening. I think they, is a basic sense of trust there.
And Jeffrey asked, what did the staff eat at the White House mess?
Well, we would occasionally, now when we did those working luncheons, because there were only about 3 or 4 of us working, after we brought the food back to the pantry lady would prepare it and put it up, and we would eat. We were always allowed to eat the hors d'oeuvres, after receptions. But when it came like for a state dinner, it was, there were too many people. So the first thing that the part-timers would do when they came in to work would be to go down to the dining room down in the kitchen, down in the basement, and have a meal served to them. So we never got to eat any of the state dinner food, but like I said, for the working luncheons and as far as hors d'oeuvres were concerned, we definitely got to eat that.
Where did the Secret Service eat and stay during these dinners?
I have no idea where they ate. They would be on the floor, around different points on the state floor. But where, that's the only thing that I, if they ate, they probably ate in the mess, which was, I think, over in the old executive office building. But they never ate with us.
And if you want to take this question, you can. If you don't, that's fine too. Was your job at the White House well paid?
Well, I get that question a lot when I'm doing my presentations, and I used to answer it straight away, but I kind of like to put it into a little bit of a context now because of all the controversy, especially recently over the minimum wage. Now, remember that this was like 40 years ago, and we got $10 an hour for the first 4 hours, $15 an hour for the next 4, and then anything over 8 hours was $18 an hour. And at that time, I never really considered it to be good money. It wasn't bad. It wasn't necessarily good either. Again, there are people nowadays that clamor for a $15 an hour job. It depends on your perspective. It kind of reminds me of a story, a line that George Burns, the comedian, used to say. He said, "I'm 95 years old and I still do a lot of things that I did when I was 18." He said, "I don't know if it shows you how great I am at 95 or how pathetic I am at 18." So basically, you have to make up your own mind on that.